we are here to talk about news journalism. And for anyone who's seen Lou, you know he is quite passionate about this topic. I mean, we're in a situation right now where we have witnessed an unprecedented decline in ad investments in news, which has led to a 50% reduction in the number of journalists working in newsrooms, and that's over a 15-year period. Now, journalists are the knights of truth and are uniquely recognized in our Constitution for their vital role in holding the elected accountable to the electorate. And we have an industry leader, as I've mentioned, Lou Paskalis. If you don't know him, he's currently serving as Chief Strategy Officer of Ad Fontes Media, and he is a former marketer of Bank of America, American Express, Gallo Winery. Lou has opinions on everything, which is why this is going to be a fantastic conversation. So,
very few facts, but lots of opinions.
Let's start with, how do marketers view journalism today?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Marla, and thank you for that rich introduction. I think the question that we're facing right now is really one where, how do marketers view media today, right? And we've seen a real slide over of the pendulum towards performative, right? Performance-oriented. What are the down funnel outcomes? How do I get there quicker? How do I deliver more quarterly results? And in that context, news does incredibly well, except the decline in advertising in news that Marla mentioned is 80% in the 15-year period ending with the dawn of the pandemic. So something is amiss here. You've got this highly performative media that delivers the highest ROAS of any vertical: sports, lifestyle, entertainment. It delivers the greatest unduplicated reach, predominantly because of the 80% decline in spending, and yet marketers are running away from it. And they're running away from it for a number of reasons. But the biggest one is the fear of getting caught up in the culture wars. The fear that, oh my gosh, if we appear next to an article, our brand could get boycotted. And we've worked a lot at Ad Fontes Media to debunk that. It's just not true. But the problem we all have as agency folks, I was a client for 35 years, and I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for the great work of my agencies. They influenced my thinking. They made our vision real. They made the impossible happen. And so I'm here to tell you I'm an agency proponent. But the agencies are not getting access to the real decision makers now, because there were a few seminal events in the late 2019s where the decisioning moved ever so subtly from the CMO's realm into the corporate communications realm. The biggest one was George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter movement. And all of a sudden, corporate communications, AKA PR, for those of you who don't speak enterprise, was saying to the CEO, you know, maybe we should stay out of news. Maybe it's too risky. We don't want the board to question why you're advertising next to an article. And CEOs have a unique relationship with their corporate communications people, because when they go on the Today Show and they're sweating under the armpits, it's the CorpCom person there that's stroking their head saying, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And so, you know, they say, you know, just tell the CMO to stay out of news. And so everywhere else, we are thirsting for the growth that unduplicated reach and high ROAS will drive. But in this one, we can't get access to the people who are influencing the decision. And it's a real frustration. I'm going to ask you guys towards the end about, you know, how we attack that.
Okay. So you brought up risk, and risk is real. And agencies are doing their best to avoid risk for their clients. And they're also trying to push them in appropriate ways. But they know at times they have pushed them into areas that the clients have perceived as risky, and then they're blamed for that. So what can agencies do to really address this challenge?
So I think there's three very specific things to start chipping away at it, because as everything in life, there's no silver bullet. Number one is have a conversation around the policy that the client has in news. You can do it under performance enhancement, or you can do it under civic responsibility. Either way in is fine, depending on what's important to your client. But the first question is, are we blocking news? Are we blocking news entirely? Well, okay, that's not right. And we have some new data that I'm going to share today that says that the vast majority of news is very, very safe, and it's very easy to identify the news that is going to lead to some of the concerns that cause you to block news. The more insidious problem, and the easiest one of all to solve, is the block list. So if you have a keyword, if your client has a keyword blocking list, it works most like a roach motel. Do you remember this expression, roaches check in, but they don't check out? We just keep adding words. There are 16,000 words in a keyword blocking list. I defy you to find one news article that can circumnavigate that keyword blocking list. So you know what? Have a keyword blocking list review. Let's go through them. Hey, Hillary Clinton's still on here. She's a great-grandmother. What's the problem with her? Maybe we take that out, Maybe Republican isn't a word we should be blocking. Really work with the client under the guise of opening up growth-driving inventory to, look at that. Then you're on the board of TAG, and TAG Trust Networking with A&A did a great study on programmatic media and found out 1 in 5 impressions are going to MFAs, made for advertising sites that are low quality, dubious editorial, bad experiences. Not one of the 21 participants in that study had a single MFA site on their inclusion list, except 49,000 MFA sites actually ended up receiving inventory through the vagaries of programmatic. So let's have a conversation about MFAs. Do we want to advertise on it? Are there certain exceptions? When should we run there? And start to look at those low quality investments that have very little yield and virtually no measurability as a potential source of dollars to do the third thing I'm going to ask you to look at, set up some tests. Clients think that if they run a news, they're going to end up, in the boogeyman's control. They're not. You got to test your way into that, though. We can jump up and down as an industry and say, you're missing out on news. But until you bravely have the conversation, and I know how hard it is to get time with the client right now, and I regret that. On behalf of a lifelong client, I apologize for that. That's terrible. But you got to use some of your time to actually push them out of their comfort zone and say, let's just test a little bit of news. There are a lot of ways to do that. What we do at Ad Fontes Media, we tell you what the highest reliability, lowest bias news is. It's about 85% of the inventory that's available in news, and it's the least likely to drive the bad outcomes you want. We're talking about approximately 500 billion high-quality impressions a quarter. That is unduplicated reach. That has a very affluent audience. Those tests will show that news is worth the round trip, and the boogeyman doesn't come out of the closet and threaten your brand and your board in a boycott.
Yeah, I think those are all great suggestions for agencies to take. And you mentioned MFA, the forays. We view it as made for arbitrage because not all MFA sites are bad, and there is some decent ones, but that is a good source for finding investment and as an opportunity. And we all know that agencies are looking for opportunities to test and learn and have their clients grow. One of the other challenges that I think it's important to address when it comes to news is the age factor. We know that marketers love the young and just have this perception that the young are not attracted to news. And so how do you address that as it relates to agencies making the case?
You know what I love about this? Marla and I did not discuss this in advance.
That's a question
right?
I just,
right. But
I'm a former
here's the thing.
Person,
we've known each other a long time, right? So we just released on our website, adfontesmedia.com, for free, some research that we did with Civic Science, John Dick, and Edwin Wong at Vox Media. And they did this pro bono for us because they believe in the importance of news. And what we found is that young people, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, are returning to traditional news sites for the first time in like 16 years because they feel like they got burned in the last election cycle and they were being fed a diet of, divisive misinformation that was algorithmically perfected, and they want to go upstream to the source. So I wouldn't say it's a trend. I'd say it's green shoots, but people are now tired of becoming, pawns in rhetorical wars, and they're going to go sort. And there were 30 years ago. You're probably too young to remember this. We talked about media pointillism, and media pointillism was this idea: is I'm going to sort. Remember Surratt? The painting, Bathers on the Island of the whatever. Chicago Museum,
Ferris
by the way.
Bueller's reference too.
Ferris Bueller, right. That's a much better, yeah. So anyhow, the idea of media pointillism was I would source my news from many, many different sources and then paint my own picture in my head. And that's what young people are starting to do now. So there is hope there. And I think that's just going to get accelerated as the more and more ridiculous things start to circulate, like Taylor Swift, the FBI, the White House, Pfizer, and the Super Bowl and the NFL. Which, like, if you really, really want to have a laugh, go online and listen to Vivek Ramaswamy explain that on a YouTube video, because you can't make this stuff up. And so there's good news that young people are finding interest in news, and they are the toughest cohort.
I think that's a really helpful suggestion there too. And again, look at that research because it can be very helpful. So we know that given the decline that is happening with advertising and the way most media work, you need advertising funding in order to fund the people that are putting out the content. And with the decline in journalists, that's all related. So they're very much in danger right now from a financial standpoint. But we also see some of these news sites augmenting the ads in order to compensate and make up for the differential, which is not creating a great ad experience. So what are some things that agencies can do to work with these news outlets beyond what you've already shared to really try and address this and get advertisers to understand that it's partially their responsibility to help address this too?
I love that question. And Vanessa Otero, who is the CEO and founder of Adfontes Media, who is sitting right there, and I have been doing a lot of work with local journalists in partnership with the Lenfest Institute and the Aspen Institute. I was just at an event in Charleston last week with about 200 local publishers, and the number one thing these news publishers are saying, which is just shocking to me until I think about it for 3 seconds, they don't get access to you. They don't know how to talk to an agency. They're knocking on the door of the local factory and seeing if the plant manager wants to run an ad. It's just, having grown up in this industry and having had the luxury of always being a, Publicis or Group M or whatever client, you just don't think about that stuff. You're in that bubble. Well, make yourself accessible. I was very fortunate at Bank of America that our CEO wanted to advertise locally to make us feel like a hometown bank, even though we were this massive, East Coast institution. And so we were running in 100 different markets in local news outlets. And, I went and met with these folks, found out what they were all about. And, local news is the most trusted news there is. And it's because they're part of the community. You see the anchor at the country club. You run in the grocery store to the guy who covers sports. Your local high school hockey team schedule is in there. So there's a lot of trust there. And if you think about every major marketer in this country, they have local footprints. It might be a regional office. It might be a plant. It might be some, retail outlets. They want to show up locally. You will do them a service if you bring them some options in the local markets where they have a footprint and say, you know what, this is high value, high quality news. It shows you care about the community, and it's relatively inexpensive to execute. It's not about reach necessarily. It's really about the optics of being supportive of that local community. It matters to your employees. It matters to your shareholders. It matters to all those constituencies that, really influence the reputation of the company. So preach local, but also find a way to carve out some time in your schedules for a 30-minute call with a local public. And I'm going to ask you to do something that you're going to all throw tomatoes at me. Call that local news publisher, introduce yourself, find 30 minutes to have a conversation with him or her, and see if you can cultivate something there. I know that's crazy, But I also grew up in this industry, and I remember the days when that was part of the job at the agency, and the agency would then come to the client and say, we've got a recommendation for you. And open up those pathways because they're failing. I'll just tell you this quick story. I was sitting next to a guy who ran the Mansfield, Ohio, whatever paper. And it has a 350,000 person market. And he was telling me proudly how he just took a second mortgage on his home so he could keep paying his reporters. That story's not going to end well. And that's on all of us, right? We've got to give them a hand. And I'm going to ask you to do something that, probably isn't what you would expect at a conference like this. Think about the world you want your children to grow up in. We are now in the post-truth era. And the only people defending the truth are journalists. And the war on truth is not going well. And it's really bad locally, where 1/4 of local news institutions have failed. And those that remain have gone from from dailies to weeklies, an overwhelming number. And that's where the gerrymandering starts. Those crazy looking congressional districts that look like a string bean that Max Headroom, projected with very digitized left and right corners that don't have any geographic significance. That's where the school boards are banning the books that we read as children. That's where, the zoning is getting changed. Without local reporters, that's going to get worse. And you're on the front lines of those investment decisions. You got to lean in if you want a great place for your kids to grow up.
All right. Thank you. You can see Lou is passionate about this topic. I want to go to some Q&A. Kevin.
Excellent. Do you think there's an opportunity for agencies, this is probably a little tactical, to share a master set of keyword blocking lists, as you mentioned, and kind of do a collective peer review to just essentially go through and analyze all of the keywords at one time and look for opportunities to maybe expose more news that would be blocked otherwise?
Yeah, and that's a beautiful, beautiful use case for trade associations like the 4As to actually do that. Let's do that for keywords, and let's do that for MFAs. And let's share intelligence, because all they're doing in both cases are diluting the investment potential on the campaigns that you are placing and being judged on the ROAS, by the way, a term I hate, for. So if we work together, there is no downside. This isn't collusion. You're not going to have Doug Wood in your ear saying this is collusion. That's inside baseball, sorry. And so let's do that immediately. Let's maybe that's a call to action for you, because we need that kind of leadership.
Yeah, we've tried that. We started that a few years ago with our Advertiser Protection Bureau, trying to really look at this and find a way to make it more automated. It is challenging, but we can take that on. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hey, we just got 5 more minutes on the clock. I want to thank whoever did that.
I don't know if
this is fun.
True or not. We'll see.
Well, we're taking it.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Lou, have you seen specific industries that are more receptive, or maybe we talked about the risk aversion? Are there certain industries that kind of lean into news more heavily that you've seen than maybe some others?
Yeah, watch the evening news and tell me if you see an ad that's not for pharmaceuticals. I'd be surprised, right? I mean, my God, I literally am paranoid about every possible ailment right now. And I think I can sing that song about Trulicity in my head with the woman in the yellow dress. I'm like, stop. So pharma, recognizes the opportunity to reach a certain age cohort in evening news. And I've talked to like the Gail Horwitz of the world, who's at Novartis, and they have zero risk. I also talked to the woman who followed me in my role at Bank of America running global media, because I knew we were, so committed to news. I said, have we seen any blowback whatsoever from any of these, woke agenda-like concerns? And the answer is no. And let me just build on that for 1 second, because we have some research that we were hoping to release here today, but it's still in progress. One fact that we found that's really interesting. So we rate the news on bias and reliability. And minimally biased, highly reliable news is generally in the upper middle of our media bias chart, which you've probably seen online quite a bit. It looks like a mustache. Right? So about 80% of the inventory in news is in the highly reliable, minimally biased category. And we did a little study on the whole Dylan Mulvaney incident with the Budweiser can a year ago, right? Yeah. And now here's what we found. 70% of the people who routinely read high quality news, minimally biased, highly reliable news, had no reaction, were completely unfazed by the whole, brouhaha around Dylan Mulvaney. However, people who read low quality news, the fringe stuff, the stuff that, is conspiracy theory on both sides, the right and the left, 154% more likely to have boycotted Bud immediately after that incident. And not to get political, but a little bit of an insight of that group, those that read right-leaning, low-quality news were 785% more likely to take an action. So we can help you avoid right-leaning and left-leaning news and just focus on high-quality news where the opportunity is. And I think most categories would be excited about that. Another one that has not moved away from news is auto. And I don't know, I read somewhere that auto spends a lot of money. So.
Can I just see a quick show of hands? How many of you are currently investing in news on behalf of any of your clients? I know not everyone here is agent. Okay, so see, there are people investing, which is good to see, but like to see a lot more hands. Go ahead, Kevin.
What are your thoughts on the demise of Black and African American and Spanish language community newspapers?
That's a real disaster because those community newspapers are much more the fabric of those communities than Gen Pop. It's analogous to local in the sense that, they come together. And I don't agree with demise. I do think there is decline. They are a tremendous public service. And I think increasingly coming out of BLM, where marketers are now required as part of internal governance to demonstrate a certain percentage of their budget is going to those, diverse-owned media. I think you'll see some more there. But we as agencies have an opportunity there. When this all hit, and there was a lot of pressure to drive more business to diverse-owned media, GM did something amazing, and I give a lot of credit to Mary Barra and Heather Stewart, who was running media there at the time. They segmented minority-owned media into a third that were viable, a third that weren't viable. They just didn't have the measurement, they didn't have the modality, and a third that could be viable. And they took that middle third to Detroit for 4 days, and with their agency partners, actually ran a whole course on how to sell to clients, how to be, get into the RFP process, et cetera. They actually invested in making the ecosystem better. And I think we should do more of that versus, just saying, they don't really compete. I can't measure. There's not enough quality inventory there. Yada, yada, yada. I can't spend the money. Yeah, bullshit. You can.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion. And we've been working, the 4As and the ANA have published guidance for not only diverse suppliers on how to work with agencies, but agencies how to work with diverse suppliers. And I think it's a reminder going back to the earlier point about MFA. And for those of you who are not aware, really look at your programmatic buys because pre-pandemic, it was probably 7% going to MFA. It is closer to 25%. And so there is money going to places that are probably not delivering the way that you expect them to. They're low cost, they're efficient, but are they effective? And test and learn, take some of that money, and there's a real opportunity. We got time for one more quick question.
I just need to do a shameless plug on what Marla just said. So TAG, Trustworthy Accountability Group, we're just now releasing, I'm working with them as well, the benchmarking tool for MFA. And we can actually come in very quickly and free of charge for ANA members, the first 35, actually rate how you're doing with MFA and give you guidelines on how to reduce that. And that's something we're just announcing.
Yeah, and this is for a client to pay. So as an agency, you should still encourage your clients to be able to take advantage of this opportunity.
It's free for them. So you just look like a hero.
Yeah.
Okay, time for one more. Many brands may block running on news sites entirely because of negativity, right? Not necessarily risk, but just negativity in general. How would you address those concerns with a brand?
I think we're at 4th and 25, to use a football analogy. And it comes down to what I said earlier, what kind of country do you want to live in? If we lose control of the truth, if journalism recedes into the darkness, we're going to be in a really weird world where everything from our economics to our societal dynamics to our democracy are in jeopardy. And when Ashwini was up here earlier, she talked about, the leadership conversations and pushing the clients into areas of discomfort. I think you got to pivot out of programmatic efficiency, media optimization, and ROAS and say, let's have a heart-to-heart conversation about what kind of world we want for our families and our children, Mr. or Miss Client. Let's agree here that this is probably a mission that transcends the economic outcomes. That said, I know the economic outcomes of adding news will actually be robust. Let's set up tests so that we can prove to ourselves that news is a good investment. But we got to lean in here because, after the election, you're going to see another wave of layoffs that we just saw in the last 2 weeks. The Wall Street Journal eliminated 20 positions in their Washington, D.C. office on Monday, including the entire team that covered the business of China and the U.S. It's not a hot topic, right? I went last week to the Washington Post and did a talk very much like this for their employees the week that they let go of 240 people out of their newsroom through managed buyouts. These local news platforms are disappearing. They won't come back. You guys are at the crossroads of whether or not they succeed or fail. Have an uncomfortable conversation. Take a leadership stand. Lean into the fact that you were hired for your advice, but you're being evaluated on your performance.
And on that note, we're going to say thank you. And you've got lots to follow up on.